Hello, everybody, and welcome to Stony Brook University's Creative Writing BFA reading series, Imagine Wednesdays. Before we jump into the program for today, I want to be sure to invite everyone to our BFA Senior Showcase here live on this YouTube channel in just a couple of weeks. That's Wednesday, April 28th at 1 p.m. Eastern to hear our talented students read their work. Today, however, I have the great pleasure of hosting as we hear from the TAs who teach in our undergraduate program. We have a great lineup for you today. My name is Mackenzie Watterson. I'm an MFA candidate here at Stony Brook and an undergraduate instructor myself. As the organizer of this reading, I'm going to kick us off with a brief excerpt from a personal essay of mine about my grandfather's Alzheimer's, memory loss, and its legacy in my family. This excerpt is from a section about my grandmother. I wonder if Papa's decline impassioned my grandmother's persistence in recording our family history. Dark, wood-patterned plastic photo albums with golden lettering lined the walls of my grandparents' home. Each one my grandmother pored over for hours, filling them with photos marked with dates and names in her shaky handwriting, newspaper clippings, school play pamphlets, marriage licenses, baptism announcements, and family trees whose branches filled more each year as she researched deeper into our past. There were wedding albums for my father and his siblings. These were silver or gold rather than brown. There were town albums with her collected records of Freud, Montana, the farmland on the High Line where my father was raised. There were grandkid albums, 2 filled for me before I left elementary school. She let me choose the color of my 3rd album from the pages of her scrapbooking catalog, green. On our afternoons that smelled like burnt cookies, peonies, and Listerine, she'd put away the crafts and the Barbies and pull out one of her thick albums. "This is my Grandma Deming," she would say. "Here is your grandfather's brother." I looked for familiarities in the faces, these strangers who were part of me. The nose, I noticed, was the same. Grandma pulled out her trunk and from it a delicate clothes box lined with tissue paper. "This is the kimono your grandfather sent me when he was overseas." She let me touch the yellow fabric, creased with years of storage, embroidered with pink and red flowers. "He had to ship out right after we got married," she said. And then, "You know, his family never approved of his marrying me." I wish I had asked her more. I wish I had listened, knew the journey my family took to bring me here in this time in this place. She traced that. I think she said one of my greats ran a laundry in England, but I don't know. Without her knowledge, I'm unmoored from history. In a family that is losing memory, on land where trees count the years in rings, growing proud, wide bands for rainy years, thin ones for drought, dark scores for fire, where you could scoop a hand into the soil of my father's childhood farm and hold a story, a composition of molecules from every crop planted, animal raised, fertilizer sprinkled, by every insect who burrowed and by the birds that ate them, where mountains hold layers that detail millennia. On land that holds memory, my grandmother worked with the force of nature. Thank you. And now on to our other excellent TAs. Our first reader of the day, we have Jen Cooper. So excited to introduce Jen. Jen is in their 2nd year as an MFA student and teaches Introduction to Creative Writing with the theme of identity and community. Jen is teaching a fiction course in the fall about the fragment and vignette form, which is the structure of their thesis. They will be reading an excerpt from their fragmented thesis for you today. Jen, take it away.
Hi, everyone. So as stated, I'm Jen, and I'm reading an excerpt from my fiction thesis, If We Make It to Someday. Stall the drowning. I want to cry by the water in the rain to feel seen, but the ocean has her own tears. How can you beg someone not to leave when they left because you begged them to stay? Things on land that can drown you. Work, puddles, love, pain. A winter prayer. Thank the cold that numbs the pain, that atrophies crappy emotions to blistering fingers, reminding me why I used to cut. I'm angry that the rain is subsiding and the sky is bluing and pinking and welcoming. Just let me say one thing without making me a fool. My options: walk through the slush or dance around on slick ice. The easy answer is the thin layer of ice I have already been skating on. The wind pushes rushing ripples on the water. Here comes the storm. Wishes. I can feel myself in the future reaching back to this memory I'm making right now, reminding me, I told you so. I shouldn't have shown you my ocean. You would drown me, but I'm going to take you there anyway. Does embracing insanity count as enough of a change to expect a different result? You asked why I can't sleep, and I told you it wasn't you, and I lied. That's why I tell myself to stop. Every smile at a message, stop. Every sexy joke, stop. Am I that deluded where I think I have enough self-growth not to fall in love with you? Haven't I learned not to say that, and haven't I learned not to write it for writing it makes it true? Stop pretending you don't know we're flirting, and stop pretending you're not pretending. Stop pretending like you don't know I'm staying up to talk to you. I wish I could get that stoned and pretend to play dumb. You have a girlfriend, so I am a tumbleweed. I will stay a sexless spinster, thank you very much. The most tenuous of strings, a glass falling to shatter at any moment. Knowing there's no possibility is different than being told there is no possibility. When you say you are getting feelings, the oh no, 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 I'm muttering to myself does indeed mean yes. And I'm a monster slut. You're the only one there at 3 a.m. And it sucks being the single one in a relationship. The drowning comes anyway. The smell of fire and smoke and marshmallows clashed with the salt of the ocean. Arrest those happy people. Am I that bitter that when I see a stable home, I have to wreck it? I don't know if you have a stable relationship, but I hope you do, because then I can call myself the unquestionable villain in a story I have written. Nose wrinkled at the fire and laughter, I round the corner to my road, my ocean, and the cotton candy house comes into view, perched over the bay I've kayaked in, loved in, drowned in. Wishes are desperation with hope. The sky wept its tears with somber certainty, heaven's sympathy. The lies we tell ourselves are beautiful and intricate, and I would rather hear them than the truth. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen. Lots of love in the comments for you. A couple of lines that people especially loved. It sucks being the single one in a relationship, and some appreciation for the line, I am too a tumbleweed. Arrest those happy people. So much love to you, Jen. And on to our next reader. Next up, we have Chelsea Diaz Amaya. Chelsea is an MFA candidate at Stony Brook University. Her story received an honorable mention in the Craft Short Fiction Prize of 2020. She has an essay forthcoming in the Southampton Review. Chelsea, can't wait to hear from you.
Thanks, Mackenzie. So this is an excerpt from an essay. It's the very first time I met her was on a Wednesday, 4:30, Elmhurst Hospital. It was snowing. She was 6 centimeters dilated when she told the doctor she wouldn't give birth without eating first. 5-foot woman waddling through a light blizzard for a cream cheese bagel and a hot chocolate. Third child. She knew this would take a while. For over 10 hours, she pushed me out of her womb in that hospital heat. She says I've been stubborn ever since, that I was born with the reddest body she'd ever seen. The night she first held me, I sensed she had spent time deciding which story to tell me as she memorized every centimeter of my face, the way my newborn eyes squinted at the light overhead. In the odd hours of the night between feedings and nurse observations, I sensed there was a story. But I have met her many times. As I did homework at the dining table, I tried using my ELA books to teach her English. I made her read to me, with every new batch of weekly spelling words she practiced. And yet she never accepted she had learned the language. At grocery stores, when the cashier said good morning or rung up the total, she'd look at me, confused, hesitant. Have you ever felt like your tongue wants to Spanish? She asked me the other night as she put down another book on the coffee table, rubbing her eyes, sore from moving across the page, a dim lamp on the other side of the room. Your tongue wants to Spanish, but your brain wants to English. How could I tell her that she was describing what it means to be bilingual? How could I make her believe it, that for a long time, our tongues have been capable of the same words? Or the time I was 6 and I wanted an adventure without her. I had packed a Winnie the Pooh book bag with Disney books, my brother's newborn light blue blanket, and plastic toy food. I had grabbed an umbrella and a baseball cap on my way to the front door. She was sitting by the computer, practicing her English on livejournal.com, where she would usually complete grammar or spelling exercises. She squinted at me. Where are you going? She asked. Going to Washington, I said, but you're not invited. Her lips barely held a smile. The day was lazy, foggy. I could not yet walk down the porch steps with one foot in front of the other. Okay, have fun in Washington, she said, and closed the front door tightly. When I reached the sidewalk, I turned to see her round face through the glass window. She waved first, a small wave, the tips of her fingers fluttering behind the glass, but her face was blurry, and if she said anything, I had not heard her. I walked to the end of the block. The morning mist itched my eyes. Spring flowers must have been on the verge of blooming, but everything in my memory is gray except for the grass and the bright red tarp of the corner store's entryway that flapped lightly, pelted by raindrops. I reached the stoplight. I saw a man crossing the street opposite of me. He was wearing all black and had a thick hat that did not allow me to see his eyes. For some reason, I felt as if this man was going to hurt me, like he was walking directly to me in a rage. My hand, the one she usually held when she went out for errands, felt so empty it was heavy. I panicked and ran all the way back home, Winnie the Pooh bouncing on my back. When I was at my front porch again, I hoped to see the blur of her face behind the glass, but how could I tell her that when I didn't, something in me clicked and became silent? I walked inside quietly, put my books back in the room, still breathing loudly. She was at the computer again, jotting something down in a notebook. How is Washington? She asked, but didn't turn to look at me, didn't turn to see my sweaty face or red cheeks. Fun, I replied. Thanks.
Thank you, Chelsea, for that stunning portrait of your mother. Some love in the chat for you. They love the line, have you ever felt like your tongue wants to Spanish? And the repetition of, I have met her many times. So thank you so much for sharing, Chelsea. Our next reader is Jimmy Heitner. Jimmy is a speculative fiction writer pursuing his MFA through Stony Brook University. Jimmy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie. I'm going to be reading the preface of the thesis project that I'm working on, which is an environmental dystopia. And this kind of serves as the myth that becomes the narrator and his people's entire belief system. So, the revolution was born of a broken promise. I had grown up hearing countless versions of the story. Pirates at the rum sink insisted an old marooned sailor swore his promise to a beached mermaid. Older children around the island were convinced the promise was the treaty that ended a war between gods. Some inventors claimed the broken promise was simply a collective rejection of science. But my earliest memories of the story came from my parents. The way Mom told it, a young boy had made his way to the sea centuries ago when the islands of the world were still connected by land. To get there, the boy wandered through thick forests and lifeless deserts, climbed impassable mountains and navigated winding valleys. He slept on mangled roots and chewed on sour berries. He suffered through the heat and the rain, the snow and the cold. When he emerged from an overgrown tree line, he met a woman who sat peacefully on a rocky cliff by the edge of the sea. The woman invited the boy to sit with her. She congratulated him on his trials. The boy sat and explained that his people were suffering. Some were starving, others were sick. The woman commended the boy for his purpose. She told him that she could help him, but only if he could help her. I too am suffering, she had told the boy. The suffering of creatures of the land, sea, and air, the adulteration of nature, the exhaustion of our home. I cannot endure this pain much longer. The boy listened to the woman speak for 3 days. Though the days certainly passed, the boy never hungered, nor tired, nor grew bored. When she was finished, she jumped off the rocks into the sea and swam away. The boy chewed berries and slept on roots, navigated valleys and climbed mountains, and wandered through deserts and forests until he was home again. The journey back was shorter than the first, his pace quickened by his resolve. When he arrived, he visited with the sick and the starving. He brushed back their hair and told them that they would soon recover. They smiled through their failing strength and told the boy they believed. He gathered everyone who would listen and told them all to live in harmony with the beasts on the ground, the fish in the waters, and the birds in the sky, to relinquish their claimed title as sovereign beings. I promised her, the boy had said. She loves them. They're her family. And so the people agreed and lived with the land and its creatures. Soon the sick recovered and the harvests were plentiful, just as the woman had said. But as generations passed, more and more people saw the woman by the sea as a myth meant to steal their ancient traditions, a lie crafted to strangle their freedoms. Even if she had been real, the sick she had once healed had died generations earlier. There was nothing more she could give them. And arrogance boiled in their hearts, and so they waged war blindly and without restraint against the earth and all that lived upon it. With their covenant broken, the woman by the sea wept. She sent wildfires and droughts and hurricanes and blizzards and plagues, anything to remind them of their agreement. They ignored her warnings, and her unrelenting tears brought forth one final calamity. The seas flooded over their beaches, poured into their streets, and drowned the world and the deceitful beings who could not keep their promise. Thanks.
Thank you, Jimmy. I love some good speculative myth making. Lots of love for your imagination in the chat. They particularly liked the description of mangled roots and sour berries. The line boiled in their hearts and smiled through their failing strength. So thank you for bringing our speculative elements to the stage, Jimmy. Next up, we have Mary Mannion. Mary is in the second year of her MFA creative writing degree. Today, she will be reading an excerpt from the novel she is working on called Unimportant Things. Take it away, Mary.
Thanks, Mackenzie. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from the novel I'm working on. Van and I had never spoken, but I heard his name everywhere. It was in first period homeroom during the student news program when they announced who had scored goals in the soccer game the night before. It was in the auditorium speakers after Wednesday morning mass when Father Morelli announced the list of upperclassmen boys who were on track to earn the fall semester's honor roll. It echoed in the bathroom loud and clear as I listened from the stall as Whitney McGrath admitted to her friend that she wished that Van would text her more often. One night, when I was supposed to be studying for a history test, I logged onto Facebook on my family's desktop computer. Van's tagged Facebook photos were mostly of him playing soccer. If I clicked through the photos slowly to study them one by one, I found a story to uncover. In the first photo, for example, Van was standing still between plays in his soccer game with his hands on his hips, cocking his knee and staring into the distance lazily as though he were imagining all the places he could be right then that were not a soccer field. In the next photo, the ball was soaring in an arc through the air straight toward Van, and he was jumping off the grass a little, getting his feet ready to trap the ball when it landed. In the next picture, Van was blazing full speed ahead with the checkered ball guided forward by his foot. Two of the other team's defenders were flanking him, sticking their cleats in the way of his race course and doing their best to disturb his grip on the ball. Van's hair was flying wildly back by the hands of the wind, and the tie-dye headscarf that he was using to keep the sweat out of his eyes had slid back so that it was dangerously close to falling off his head. Would Van be able to see without the help of his headband? Would that lose our team the game? In the next photo, Van had passed the defenders, his headband had flown off, and he was in a beeline straight for the other team's goal. The expression on the goalie's face in the next shot read focus, determination, and fear. And then, in the next photo, the goalie was flat on the ground after diving with his arms outstretched, the soccer ball pushing back against the net that lined the goal. And then finally, there Van was, standing in front of the goal, admiring the glory he'd created. I should really get started on my history homework, I thought. What was I going to do if, by the time I grew up, I hadn't spent the time to store any useful information in my mind? At the same time, though, I figured that history could wait. Who in their right mind could turn their attention away from Van? I clicked onto Van's next Facebook photo and found him taking gulps from his Gatorade bottle on the sideline during halftime. Next, he was sprinting down the field in the second half of the game and throwing his hands in the air to let his teammate know that he was open to be passed to, and that if a player on the opposing team were to enter his space in the time that it took the ball to arrive at Van's feet, then he would simply make more space. Of course he would. Van would create it. There was nothing that could stop him from doing what he needed to do to win. Finally, in the last photo, Van was sitting in the grass in a team huddle after the game's final buzzer had sounded. On the scoreboard was a glowing number 0 under the opposing team's name and a beaming golden number 1 in the home team slot. Van's goal was the only point that had been scored, and as it turned out, it was the only one his team needed to win. In school, each step that Van took mirrored the easy flick of someone sliding a tiny colored wooden playing piece across board game tiles. It was entirely unsurprising then to find him on the soccer field as the unequivocal star. Van didn't brag or boast about his talents, just moved along with his time as though no one were paying him any close attention. I was more than happy to spectate, though. There was nothing unimportant that I could find about that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Lots of great imagery in there. People liked the line, history could wait. So thank you so much for sharing today, Mary. Our next TA who will be reading for you is William Stieglitz. William is in the 3rd year of his MFA program and teaches Introduction to Creative Writing. His thesis novel, Boiling Point, tells the story of a teenager named Eleanor and her android superhero mom, Lady Steam, as they strive to feel human. William, let's hear it.
Thank you. I'm going to read a short piece called Ocean Diet. Alexa, having a high tolerance for salt, did not have much difficulty drinking up the entire ocean. She did not mean to swallow the whole thing, just a little bit to bring the water level down, enough that her 8-year-old body could go deeper to where her parents stood ahead. The salt and the seaweed she slurped reminded her of her mom's diet cow chips she wasn't supposed to eat, but that Alexa took nibbles of anyway when she wasn't looking. Next came the taste of tuna, then herring, then other tangy flavors she didn't know. She slurped it all up so easily without needing to chew. Alexa didn't even realize until after that last slurp that all the water around her was gone. The seafloor lay spread out like a desert, all the fish and plant life inside her, and before her stood her parents, bewildered. They took her to see the doctor right away. He put a stethoscope over her heart and told her to breathe, but could only hear the deep rumble of brine. When he told her to, Alexa opened wide. With his small doctor's light, he could see wave crests lapping just under her tongue. Finally, the doctor had them wait outside his office for what felt like forever. It was 10 minutes before inviting them in. Your daughter is perfectly healthy, he told them. It seems she ingested a larger than normal quantity of ocean water while at the beach. While most children her age accidentally swallow between 0.4 and 2.2 milliliters on average, she ingested approximately 1.3 billion cubic kilometers. This is largely inconsequential. With a healthy diet and exercise, she should be just fine. The parents weren't especially satisfied, but Alexa thought he did a good job, especially since she got a lollipop at the end. They tried to live life like normal, which is surprisingly easy for a while, until they went out for seafood. What do you mean all your fish items are unavailable? The father asked. The waitress apologized, but the fisheries weren't bringing things in anymore. Fine, I'll have the crab then, the father said. They were out of crab too. They could get him a cheeseburger if he'd like. Who goes out to a seafood restaurant for cheeseburgers? Alexa tried to take good care of the ocean inside her. She got fish food from the pet store and downed the flakes so the smallest fish would have something nice to eat. Some days, especially when there was a storm, the waters would turn hectic inside her. She'd sit still with a stomachache and study the fish inside until the storm passed, reading to them from her picture book. That always helped when she was scared. At night, she fell asleep to whale songs. Sometimes, when her parents were asleep and the pull of the moon on the watery body inside her kept her up, she'd sneak off to the beach, where confused seagulls pecked at dried sand in the dark. Alexa would stand where the shoreline had been and try to imagine naps of icy foam against her toes. Someday, when she was older and didn't need another world inside her, she would spit the ocean back up, send back all the creatures, the coral and crustaceans and salted seaweed, and the deluge that would bring back every taste through her mouth and fill the hollow she left. The world would want the ocean back. As for the fish, she didn't know if they cared or even noticed. They had gone from one container to another, the world within it the same to them, even if it filled a different space. She would send it all back someday when she was less alone. But now she would stare up at the moon and feel it tug her almost off the land. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. People loved the humor and the imagery in your piece. They liked the image of waves lapping under her tongue and the deep rumble of brine. So thank you for sharing today, William. Our next reader today is Joe Levins. The first chapter of Joe's novel was published just last week at the Literary Review. Stories of his have appeared in literary journals over the years, and he is hoping that someday soon an entire book will be published. Joe, take the stage.
Thank you, Mackenzie. This is a piece of flash fiction. It's called Read This First. Congratulations on the purchase of your Sierra 2, another fine custom product in our acclaimed series. Please find your order in the accompanying package. Though this item has been pre-assembled prior to shipment, you will need to perform some basic steps to ensure correct and long-lasting operation. Visual inspection. Carefully assess Sierra 2's appearance. She should look exactly like Sierra, the original girlfriend, per your statement of work kit. The one who said she never wanted to see, hear, or think about you ever again. Consult several photos you have to help with the comparison if necessary. Pay particular attention to her hair. Every strand should be in place. Check for clumps or a matted appearance. Do not be terribly concerned with the color of her eyes. Recall that you were never able to get that exactly right anyway. Power up. The switch to turn Sierra on is not easy to find. This is by design. Run your fingers sensitively over the surface of the entire unit and flip the switch when you feel it. Once powered, the eyes will immediately blink 3 times and should thereafter blink once at irregular intervals. Basic operation and sensory tests. Sit Sierra in a corner, facing away from the wall, and then walk about the room. Her eyes should not follow you. Run a hand lightly along one of Sierra's inner thighs. Her legs should rapidly close together. Whisper into one of her ears, "You look beautiful today." She should exclaim, "Ha," quite loudly and push you away. Stand directly in front of Sierra and using honest, selfless inflections, extend your arms, look directly in her eyes, and say, "Will you forgive me now?" She should release a sharp sigh, blow air upward, lifting her bangs, and look toward the ceiling. She may also fold her arms forcefully or tap her foot, or do both of those things. Ask her to listen while you read your latest poem, a poem about unrequited love. Note the time. Begin reading. After exactly 30 seconds, pause and look at her. She should be sleeping. Questions. If any of the above steps fail, call our toll-free number below. Please note, the most common issue reported by customers is that the model will not always behave as desired. This is not to be regarded as a defect. It is important to distinguish between the way you would like your Sierra to react and the demeanor actually rendered, as this product is intended to offer the most current and realistic experience possible. Accessories. Enclosed with your unit, please find among the packing materials a small catalog of items available at additional cost. These have been specifically fashioned for your model to provide a more complete and complementary experience. We especially suggest you consider the cell phone, the black patent leather boots, and any one of the set of designer handbags pictured on page 4. Visit us online at www.commiseratorssolutions.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. The comment section appreciates the instruction manual style, second person point of view. And they thought it was a little creepy with the line, "Her eyes should not follow you." So thank you, Joe. Our last, but certainly not our least reader for this afternoon is Hudson Hess. Hudson is a first-year MFA candidate specializing in memoir and fiction. Hudson will be reading an excerpt from a piece about one terrible, horrible, no good, very bad night they spent in the bowels of Tokyo, Japan. Can't wait to hear, Hudson.
Thank you so much, Mackenzie, and here I go. Okay. The beginning of the end was when I took a picture with a murderer. Okay, so he wasn't a murderer yet, but in 3 months he would be. His face would be all over the news. The Visual K rock guitarist who strangled his would-be girlfriend to death in what she expected to be a romantic murder-suicide. There was no way I could have known this before the concert. When I saw him that night, I'd seen him a few times already and we'd chatted before. Of course, I liked his drummer better, but that meant there was a kind of easy casualness to the way we interacted. No nerves, no expectations, nothing. Visual K is an indie genre of Japanese music that doesn't really have a set sound. Some bands are rock, some are metal, others are more pop. The defining features of the genre were the visuals, the elaborate costumes and makeup, and also the way the audience participated. Fans, or bangya, short for band girls, fell easily into rows, allowing for enough room, usually, to do collaborative motion to the music called footy. Everyone headbanged at the same time, for example. I did and didn't fit in. I obeyed the unspoken rule of rows in footy, and even if I towered over an audience of mostly petite girls, I wasn't thoughtless. Even that night, I turned to the gal behind me before the show started and made sure to say in Japanese, "I know I'm tall, I'm sorry. If you have trouble seeing, please let me know." Like most gya, she looked shocked that I had any capacity for language. She may have wondered to herself whether I could use chopsticks too, and then smiled. No one ever did let me know if they had trouble seeing, but I never ended up on the gossip pages, so I couldn't have pissed anyone off too bad. I think things would have been different if I'd been more like those girls, wearing their cute short skirts, high heel shoes liable to snap an ankle, and enough makeup to draw attention to eyes made bigger with the use of circle lenses. Instead, I wore frayed jeans, a flannel, maybe even a leather jacket, boots, no makeup. I still stood out, but not in the same way. I wasn't competing for the attention of the men on stage like they were. In other words, I was a novelty, not a liability. Back to footy, there were various stages of headbanging. There was bending at the waist and swinging up and down. There was moving my head back and forth at just the right time to avoid smacking my skull against the person next to me. There was the windmill where I could always feel my neck cracking without fail. Then there would always be a beat just after the headbanging for everyone to pause and straighten out their hair. Visual K fans take their hair very seriously. One such footy was the futon, or also known as gyakudai. The girls in the front row would fold themselves over the rail like futons on a balcony, waiting for the dust to be beaten out of them. Other girls would come in turn and jump against their backs, while the guys on stage would screw around, grabbing girls and tugging them closer until a dog pile formed at their feet. Gyakudai was admittedly my favorite. I was always up for throwing myself against the stage just so, enough to get some air, but not enough to hurt anyone. Probably. Hard to tell. Really depended on the venue and how well the rail was padded. Once during a futon bit, a guy in a different band that had a somewhat decent following grabbed me by the throat and squeezed, staring intently into my eyes as he pulled me closer. He wore a leather mask over his face and sneered before he let me go. Later, he tossed me a water bottle. I was a little relieved to pass the token off to one of his fans. This was not the murderer to be, though, no. He wore an off-the-shoulder dress, and his hair was pastel purple at the time. A lot of visual kei bands have someone designated to a feminine role. That was this guy's lot in the band. Months later on the news, he looked a lot different without the makeup, head bowed and arms cuffed behind him. Unsurprisingly, the band broke up. Looking back at the photo I took with the band later, is there such a thing as a reverse omen? I can look at the picture now and say to myself, that figures, but there's no way that photo could have foretold what was going to happen to me or to him. Our paths diverged, and I didn't see him again after the picture was taken, except on TV. No, I'm wrong. I saw him when the band left the venue that night. He wished me a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you for rounding out our reading today, Hudson. People loved your opening line. They thought the line, "What she expected to be a romantic murder-suicide," stood out. And they laughed at the line, "Unsurprisingly, the band broke up." So thank you for sharing today. And thank you to all of our TAs for joining us today. It has been a joy to hear your work. And thank you to everyone who logged in to listen and watch. Don't forget our next Imagine Wednesday event, our BFA Senior Showcase, 2 weeks from today, right here on this channel. I hope everybody has an absolutely wonderful afternoon. I know I'm inspired after hearing all of my peers, and so I hope you're inspired to go write something as well. Have a good one, everyone.